chair was left balancing on its two hind limbs as a result of the young artifinoid applying pressure with his legs against the sturdy wooden construct. After seeing his sister's irradiating reaction, he went on to mimic her mockingly, something that was quite common between the two, one should add. "Oh, look at me. I think I am superior to my brother because my creator gave me a higher IQ." Ekstern spoke in a very nasally and purposefully annoying tone while gazing at his highly intelligent and radiant sister. "Sounds like someone is envious." X responded without glancing at her brother while returning the favour of the piercing mockery. Instructor Teo chuckled at the exchange and had once again entered the conversation shortly after. "You shouldn't ridicule your brother too much now," Ninth Vidmar said as he placed XVI. Eyes results at the space on the desk in front of him. 78 out of 100, an impressive C, X the I. Well done. Not many children can acquire such a mark in calculus at the age of 14. Ninth, Teo concluded as he was sincerely impressed with XDI's academic achievement. IX, after witnessing the score herself, experienced a sudden modification in mood, if you will, a coup d'etat of sorts, as the most recent rule of bliss was displaced by sudden discontent. The little Eineg could not hide it. She was also impressed with her older, arrogant brother. Her older, arrogant brother had once again noticed this change in emotional state and proceeded to fuel the flames. "Who is jealous now, bitch?" Sekferkin stated in a light-hearted tone, laughing to himself, with his ego fully satiated. IX, without uttering a single word, removed what little stability was present from XDI's chair by pulling out one of the hind legs with unmatched speeds. Xaon and his ego had both found themselves occupying the ground shortly after, and while making his return to the state of upright, Ix stuck her tongue out, mocking her older sibling. All right, that's enough, you two." Teo was back yet again while remaining cordial as he regulated the situation. "Now, 6th, Vidmar stated, having already placed VI's test results directly in front of him. "Do you have something to confess?" the teacher said invitingly. The card in front of Vi read 85 100ths. First. Vi began his response, yet it collapsed under the pressure of exposure moments after. "Did you copy the answers from your sister again, Vi? Be honest now." The instructor spoke of a significant matter, with his words still wrapped inside a quilt of geniality. "Yes." Vi responded as shame and defeat rushed to him with determination of a platoon on a battlefield. "She let me copy her test. I am sorry, Mr. Vidmar. I am just too stupid to understand any of this stuff on my own," the young VI declared with his head down as the walls of guilt closed in on the 12-year-old. "That's hardly an acceptable way to deal with the situation." 6th. Teo resembled a father while explaining to Vi the details of his misdeed. "Next time, Vi, just do your best. And if the score is low, IX can tutor you to help you improve for the next test." The scholar finished his sentiment with a smile and genuine understanding accompanying it. "Oh yes, and 9th. The little lady's face was suddenly overrun by panic as Teo began addressing her. "I am deducting 20 points from your test score as a penalty for letting your brother cheat," Vidmar concluded with his back towards 9X, while in motion towards his desk. "What? No!" The young woman was truly devastated upon receiving such a harsh punishment. Xie laughed at his sister's pain maniacally, and shortly after his laughing episode was no more, he proceeded to speak. "Your new score is 76 out of 100, which means my score is 2 points higher, which means I am smarter than you after all." Smugness dominated the entirety of Saxtiard's essence as he began laughing once again. Eeks lowered her head down on the desk, with her arms providing the platform, and loudly exclaimed, "Ah!" Days, months, and years had passed, and the children would be submitted to the same cycle of academic and physical training. The strides that had been made were masterly, to say the least, as each one improved rapidly while submerged in the atmosphere of unrelenting trials. It does have to be mentioned that some, as per common, were advancing faster than others, as some were much more committed to the process. XXV, IX, and even VI for that matter, dominated every obstacle that was thrown their way, while the middle sibling out of the four, XVII, elected to take another path, so to speak. You see, as all of the children were gaining in age, they have been gradually provided more and more freedom, with the main driver behind such a development being Valeria Martins. She had convinced her husband time and time again to slowly shatter the proverbial shackles that were placed on them as to award the Artifinoids for their unequalled progress. The children were eventually allowed to leave the facility, and the one who had utilized that permission the most was in fact X, while the three would mostly remain inside the walls of the facility, training XVI. I would often be out and about the surrounding locality. Not much was known about the exact details of XVII's adventures, so to speak, but not much was made out of the situation, as the creation would always return to the construction in a timely manner. On one of those days, the intrepid Artifinoid arrived back to the compound relatively late, and once inside, he headed directly towards the gym. Desiring to be alone while doing some training, Extend was in for an unfortunate surprise, as all of his siblings had already been found occupying the predetermined destination, and I were amidst of an act deeply forbidden by the research team, hence why such late time in the night was chosen in an effort to provide the barrier of furtiveness needed. The two Artifinoids were full-on brawling, and as recently mentioned, this interaction was not allowed due to concerns raised about the possibility of the precious creations irreparably harming one another. Light sparring was permitted. However, this act would always be heavily supervised by the research team. X and Vi were anxious to see what they can do against each other, as the time of the final stages of testing was quickly nearing. The final testing was designed to be a fully comprehensive set of trials during which the children would be pushed to their max, with the results recorded in great detail. Some of those tests would include the trials of strength, speed, agility, reaction time, durability, and so on. The children were greatly excited by this prospect. Well, at least two of them were, as XVI was not one to care, while XXV possessed an interest in the procedure rather than the raw eagerness of his two youngest siblings. The same interest mentioned was amidst XXV on this particular day as well, as he stood outside the designated skirmish space, carefully observing the contest between his brother and sister. "XThief, I am glad you joined us," XXV stated in a neutral tone, with his vision glued to the dance in front of him. XThiim was not in the best of moods due to his recent plan being effectively spoiled. However, the irritated Artifinoid opted to stay and to join his older brother as a spectator. "So, who is winning?" XThiim stated in a disenchanted voice while taking a seat against the wall of the gymnasium. Ninth XXV responded instantly. However, Vi is not giving it his all, while she most certainly is. XXV added, yet he wasn't quite done. Despite, IX should win in a real fight between the two, as the speeds that our sister can reach are quite remarkable. With enough training, she should be able to obtain attack speeds so fast that the force produced as a result of her strikes would be truly devastating. XXV was explaining the instance to XTHY with great detail in his trademark professorial fashion, and there was still more. VI is most assuredly tough, yet the technique that our sister could utilize, alongside the pure pace of her strikes, would surely bring him down eventually. Of course, it is hard to know for certain since, as mentioned prior, That Eyes is letting her have the upper hand at this current juncture. XXV's eyes were still fixated on the giant and the little acrobat as he finished his sentiment. Speed is overrated, XXV stated, chuckling to himself, having dismissed the entirety of the information relayed onto him by his older brother. Perhaps, brother, perhaps. XXXV's response was concise and lodged inside a box of mystery. While the two observers partook in their discourse, the two participants were now finished. "Damn you fast, sis," Vi proclaimed with a smile crafted with the material of heavy pride. "No way could I ever beat you," he appended, furthering the praise for his elegant and beautiful sibling. "Perhaps some things are better when repeated." Extan surely subscribed to this notion on this day. "Speed is overrated," XV yelled out for all to hear. The words of the Artifinoid were stitched together with suture of provocation. He smiled at this, whilst his sister was much less appreciative of the invoking statement. "Oh, yeah?" he stated, having now turned her body towards the provocateur. "You want to come over here and prove it?" The feisty little beauty retorted with incitement of her own. Xaciongs was chuckling at his sibling in a manner most dismissive, completely unfazed by the challenge. IX had noticed this and upped the ante, as they say. "Maybe you are just too much of a bitch, though, huh?" The smiles across all evaporated quickly once Nyx arrogated the jargon most commonly used by X2 himself, while, of course, using it against him. Sextiand chuckled again, albeit this time his outing carried the playful tone no more. The resolute Artifinoid stood up and neared his sister, having officially accepted the challenge. With Vi and Dexinans having effectively swapped places, it was now the youngest and the oldest of brothers that initiated an interchange. "This is going to be quick," Vi spoke as his words resonated with rampant confidence. "She is going to destroy him," Vi concluded, yet one shouldn't deduce the presence of malice behind Vi's statement, as the giant loved his middle brother just as much as he loved his sister. XXV, after hearing Vi's assumption, opted to remain silent while the expression on his face provided all the required conveying. Simply put, XXV had respectfully and majorly disagreed. The contest had officially commenced. The two started to maneuver around methodically, with neither one willing to bring about the opener, however. This weight would sooner bear down on IX, as she could carry the weight of delay no longer. The masterful acrobat opened up on her older brother. One strike after the other she landed on X2, who had no chance of dodging a single one. XVI absorbed the entirety of IX's wave of attacks, the speed of which was inexpressible. The beauty would hit her brother with full force in multiple locations, ranging from the legs to even the head. Seon stood upright as long as he could, however. Even the toughest trees fall over eventually. Seon was brought down to the ground at once. EX was jubilated, having prepared herself to register a victory, yet this was an effort not to be as XC rose back to his feet shortly after having suffered the collapse. "That's all you got?" Xteggers stated in a deeply mocking tone. IX remained quiet and continued her attack. Just like before, the young woman would strike her brother with all her might while gaining greatly in speed, and just like before, her brother would eventually drop down. However, just like before, her brother would then quickly rise back up. "When are you going to actually start trying?" Exthion inquired as he added the sauce of goading to his soup of ridicule. Frustration had started to seep in for the young lady as she returned back to the physical bombardment. Hit after hit and strike after strike, and yet again, XVI, I was down. And yet again, XVI, I was back up. Overrun by bitterness, Ix charged at her brother with all that she could muster, exhausting her reserves in full while reaching speeds truly monstrous, however. The young lady had committed a grave sin of fighting as she let emotions overwhelm her. Amidst the uncompromising barrage, Ix had opened herself up to a strike, and Exthion did not require an invitation to capitalize on such an opportunity. The middle brother hit his sister in the abdominal area with an unprecedented force. Suddenly, the volley of strikes was ceased at once as the unfortunate lady dropped down on her knees and arms, with oxygen quickly evacuating her body. She was left defenseless while gasping for air, however. XVI, I was not yet done. He approached his striking sister, grabbed her by the neck, and lifted her from the ground in her totality. The new display in front of XXV and VI was now Xthati holding his sister up by the neck, squeezing the life out her as her feet dangled in the air helplessly. She began to tap on her sibling's arm as a sign of forfeiture, but Texthive was not having it. The Artifinoid increased the pressure and began clutching the woman's throat even harder than before. Life was beginning to leave the little beauty's body while she continued to tap against Extican's arm, with every subsequent touch having less and less force behind it. Vi could bear this torturous exhibit no more. He tried rushing to the aid of his lovely sister, but was quickly precluded by XXV, who had extended his arm while grabbing V whilst he was already in motion. "He is going to kill her," Vi shouted, impalpably petrified of the thought of losing his most precious. "I have to help her." XXV remained in quietness while simply shaking his head at his younger brother. V felt the pressure comparable to the one his sister was feeling as he witnessed the savagery on display. However, the performance would end soon enough. Ix had once again reunited with the foundation of the gymnasium. The death clutch was released as the little equilibrist wheezed, trying her hardest to recover her breath once more. While towering over the gorgeous, tiny blonde, Exthion began to speak. "So much for speed, huh?" The artificial creation chuckled to himself, briefly after which he progressed to walk back to his original location, swapping places with Vi yet again. The look of defeat deep inside the woman's eyes was as immense as the Atlantic Ocean itself, once the grand realization of her middle brother's capabilities became fully unveiled. "You okay?" Vi inquired with his voice wavering, having quickly closed the distance to his most cherished. Vi was greatly rattled by what had evinced just moments prior. "I am okay, cutie pie," she quickly responded as she regained the ability to breathe entirely. Vi's face remained one engulfed by concern. "I am okay. Sixth, really, I am," she concluded with a smile in an effort to calm her brother down as the giant began to embrace his sister before quickly helping her back up to her feet. "Well done, brother," XXV stated in composed tone, completely unaffected by the most recently transpired. In fact, XXV had fully expected the outcome from the first moment on. Dare to take on Vi next? XXV's inquiry was leading indeed. Sextiant produced yet another chuckle before answering his sibling. "I only take on fights I can win, XXV. Exthiti's answer was a coffin of honesty, while the nails made to craft the casket were ones of awareness. As Exthion knew fully well, he could not handle his younger brother's raw strength. XXV's silence was everlasting, but the Artifinoid did smirk at his brother, a sign of agreement, most assuredly. This scrimmage was the last event of the night, as once Yeeks had made her swift and full recovery, the artificial quartet had left the vicinity of the gymnasium. The year was 2009, and the previously mentioned final stage of testing inched closer and closer. However, something much more dire and menacious was nearing the point of its arrival as well. The past, after all, has a tendency to catch up to the ones who attempt to run away from it the most, and with the types of operations within the facility alongside their magnitude. The past had manifested itself as a force quite indomitable. Connections ended, lives erased, and deals broken could only truly produce a result highly undesirable, and with the wretched affairs promptly adding up. The freight train of the former era would become impossible to outrun. The calm was about to end as the storm prepared for its devastating advent. Chapter 3-4. Animals. Let's start with some names, shall we? There was, of course, Pavel Agnasiev, the Russian businessman who had experienced an unfortunate episode of cardiac arrest whilst inside the car on his way home. Then there was a local doctor by the name of Valentin Kos, who, upon discovering the full scope of the procedures that were being performed inside the facility walls, acquired what they call cold feet, and as a result had retracted himself from an arrangement previously crafted with Dr. Sokolov. When he was discovered, his whole body was cold, and not just his feet, if one gets the drift. We also have numerous lab assistants who threatened Sokolov with exposure, having not fully grasped the doctor's true extent of capabilities. This was a deadly mistake, as those very same lab assistants were volunteered for the augmentation program, and unfortunately they did not survive the procedure. Of course, there was the politician, Martin Kovac, who checked into a hotel room and was found completely checked out inside that very same location. However, we saved the best for last, as the Russian mob got wind of just what exactly cost their assassination attempt on the above-mentioned politician to go awry, and as many might have already imagined, the mob were hardly ones to practice forgiveness. All of this, layered with a plurality of underhanded deals, made quite the infelicitous brew, which the good Dr. Sokolov could no longer avoid in imbibing. In the cold winter of the year 2010, Dr. Sokolov was found sitting in his office, intently staring into the distance as great contemplation had consumed the doctor's mind and his essence in full. The doctor was hardly foolish and knew full well what the future had in store for him as the force that was the governmental authorities, and the Russian mob was not one which Alexander could overcome. The saving grace, however, was the fact that the entirety of the truth behind what was happening deep within the walls of the facility was not yet discovered. The 4 children, for instance, was not a secret yet unearthed, and Dr. Sokolov intended to orchestrate whatever course of actions was required in order to keep it that way. You two will take our creations, and you will head for America once all the proper arrangements have been made. Dr. Sokolov instructed his loyal assistant and his loving wife with a tone of unquestionable resolve. That's an interesting line of humour there, Doctor," Marcus Gray stated with great uncertainty, as his middle name. "It is hardly a joke, I am afraid." Sokolov instantly responded, retaining the aura of seriousness. "And you mustn't take this lightly." A flag of weighty warning was added to the house built out of material of dire gravity. "Okay, I am clearly missing some information here." Marcus could tolerate the wall of confusion no more as he attempted to puncture it with the tools of illumination. "What is it that we are talking about here exactly?" Dr. Gray inquired while quickly glancing at Valeria, who had been fully enveloped by enfeebling consternation. Perhaps Martins had anticipated this very moment. I will release all of the staff and pay them as much as I possibly can. Alexander took a slight reprieve as his voice fluctuated, compromised greatly by a wave of insurmountable sorrow. This was not a common sight for the stoic clinician to display such humanizing sentiments. After all, they deserve as much for their hard work and dedication. The doctor finished while staring into the cold distance through the decorative glass of the office window. Marcus Gray had now fully grasped the situation at hand. "Is there no other path we can take, Doctor?" Gray inquired with words of heavy defeat. "I am afraid not, my dear colleague." Still staring through the glass the doctor was, while still buried under the heavy weight of grand dejection. The room had suddenly become one filled with an overshadowing silence, as all was made transparent with just a few words. Valeria started to gently cry, while Gray proceeded with his unyielding endeavour of inquisition. "When should we leave, Doctor?" The vice grip of Rout was only strengthening as Gray continued to question his guru. "Immediately after the final testing is concluded, as you will very much require such information in order to progress your efforts forward." Upon hearing the most recent remark of her husband, Valeria's soft cries had escalated twofold. "And I assume you can't come along?" Sadness had nested a home deep within the little doctor's heart as he asked his dear friend about the unavoidable demise. "No, Dr. Gray, those who are currently pursuing me will not stop until they obtain their desired result." Dr. Sokolov's gaze had not once left the vista of the snowy habitat on the other side of the window. "I am afraid running is no longer a viable option. All the research gathered within this facility will be destroyed shortly after you two and the children depart the vicinity, as those same men possess not the knowledge of our magnificent creations, my friend." Sokolov's face remained imperturbable as he directed those closest to him. "And you will be destroyed with—" Gray's inquisition only further stoked the flames of agony that had engulfed the tiny doctor, yet he was unable to cease this effort of self-harm. "Correct," terse Alexander's response was, yet emotion had once again seeped through. Acceptance had conquered the good doctor at last, while a lake could be created with the volume of tears that the woman had shed over her ambitious husband. "I am sorry, Valeria." A truly rare moment of concession, this was as Sokolov's cheeks had suddenly become moist with the electrolyte-filled, salty solution that many call tears. Gray comforted the broken woman, while Alexander remained bided near the window, spellbound by the beautiful, Niveus painting rendered by Mother Nature herself. No more words were uttered inside the room, and only the heart-breaking wails of the tender woman were left to provide the dulcet ambience. As the demure woman that was Springtide arrived, supplanting her vehement sister Wintertide, the final stages of the testing had indeed commenced. A significant part of the research team was assigned the ever-so-important duty of presiding over the trials, while of course carefully recording the findings. However, another part of the team, mostly consisting of guards incidentally, were hard at work, prepping the facility for a grand finale of sorts. Sokolov himself was in charge of overseeing this process, in fact, as the team made rounds covering the entirety of the building, setting charges in the most appropriate of places. Dr. Sokolov desired to go out with a bang, literally. While manoeuvring the corridors of the premises, conversations sprung up indeed. The money had been transferred to the account set up most recently. "Luka." Dr. Sokolov spoke in a cordial tone, while accompanied by the monstrous tower himself. "Once we are all done here, you are free to go." Sokolov concluded his explanation, still in motion as he carefully inspected the placement of the aforementioned explosive devices. "Thank you, Doctor. My brothers and sisters will appreciate it, I am sure," the big man said while chuckling with his eyes serving the ground. "What about you, Luka? Aren't you going to spend any of it?" Dr. Sokolov inquired while wholly perplexed. Not a common state this was for the brilliant scientist. "Won't have the chance, Doc," he laughed out loud on this occasion. "I will be working." The giant glanced over at the doctor while grinning. "Whatever do you mean, Luka?" Befuddlement was not yet ready to leave the pioneering Alexander. "I am not going anywhere, Doc. That's what I meant." The two had now stopped as the big man's voice hardened, yet the cement indurated was not one of resentment, but one of loyalty. Luka Krajinci was steadfast indeed. "You won't survive the attack, Luka." With the weapon of honesty at his side, Dr. Sokolov resumed speaking to the giant. "I know, Doc, I know. But hey, I lived long enough the way I see it." He smiled again as the two re-established motion. "Plus, it's the least I can do for all that you have done for me." What Luka referenced was entirely true, as Sokolov would often help those who were loyal to him with any and all that was required. In the case of the tower himself, Dr. Sokolov had fully covered the expenses of the surgeries performed on the giant man's mother and sister. This act of altruism was hardly reserved exclusively for Luka, however, as the good doctor would bestow such largesse on many others that were employed under him. "I am not the only one either, Doctor. Some that work here now didn't have anything before they met you. No family, no real friends, and no real purpose. Hell, some didn't even have a home. Explosives was not the only material filling the halls while the two walked through them, as warm ruminations and proclamations were very much present within those. Corridors as well. But you changed that for them, and this change, Doctor, they won't forget." A heart-warming smile across the face of Luka was one impossible to miss. "They can't forget," he concluded as his voice once again solidified with seriousness. "I am moved, Luka, truly moved." The doctor was truly moved. "I must thank you for this, Luka." The two had once again abandoned movement while nearly reaching the main entrance of the compound. "You can thank me after the attack, Dr. Sokolov. You can thank me with a beer or two, in fact." The tower finished as he chuckled to himself, shortly after which the pair had made their exit out of the building. In the benign summertide of the year 2010, en route were the forces of the government to shut down in its entirety the facility located on the outskirts of the country that was Slovenia. These forces, however, were not ones that were typically utilized to apprehend and arrest, not quite, as these were mercenaries with the goal of neutralization. During this wonderful season of overarching radiance and all-encompassing joy, Dr. Sokolov was officially declared a domestic terrorist by the local government, and quite a high-grade one at that. This was the product of Sokolov's efforts. However, it was most assuredly one that Alexander had come to fully expect. In that same season, during that same year, inside that very same location, all preparations had been made to accommodate the guests for when they would finally make their arrival. Most of the staff was gone, the researchers, the caretakers, and some of the guards, however. Many had made the commitment to stay behind in an effort to assist the doctor with his endeavour one last time. Battle lines were drawn, and the brave ones who volunteered to stick around had assumed their combat positions, utilizing whatever weaponry they could muster up. The general himself was located inside his office, as per usual, anticipating the commencement of the party, yet suddenly a development most unexpected. "Are you ready, dear husband?" Valeria Martins inquired in the tone as gentle as the summer itself, having just recently entered her husband's most favourite location. "Valeria, what are you doing here? You were supposed to leave with Marcus and the children." Sokolov's words did not carry the load of anger, but one of true puzzlement and delight, as he was most certainly happy to see his beautiful wife. "This is my home too, Doctor," she stated, retaining the warm tone while beginning to near her soulmate. "I spent 31 years inside these walls, and you really thought you could just kick me out," she said, while forming a smile potent enough to fill the gloomy room with quite the luminance. "What made you change your mind about leaving, my dear?" Sokolov's curiosity demanded satiation while he carefully observed his wife's actions, having been truly uplifted by her unforeseen appearance. "I never changed my mind, Alexander." With heart-warming tonality in one hand and a blinding grin in the other, she kept in motion towards the doctor. "I knew I would stay here with you since the first time you mentioned your intentions, Dr. Sokolov. I had nothing when arrived in this country, with only sorrow and desperation in my pockets, while my family was miles and miles away, and terribly ill." She stopped momentarily while looking down on the ground, however. Shortly after, the elegant woman would liberate her vision from the chains of the floor, raise her head up and gaze upon her husband with a look of translucent affection before continuing to speak. "But you changed that for me, Sasha." Short and sweet the last remark truly was, yet it encapsulated all that the woman was currently feeling. The good doctor's silence conveyed more emotions than any words could at that very moment, and as the doctor drew a gentle grin across his face, he extended his arm out to the woman, inviting her to grab it. Valeria Martins was more than happy to oblige. The cavalry had arrived on the facility premises, so to speak, and this was quite the impressive force as well. Heavily armed and very well trained, they stormed the facility without any hesitation as to enact their detailed plan of attack. Once the grand entrance had been made, the halls of tranquillity were no more, as the deafening resonance of gunfire reigned dominant. The guards gave their all, and did all they could truly, yet the end result was one fully envisioned. The mercenaries came out on top with very little in terms of casualties to show for. The big man himself, the tower, was the last barricade as he stood tall in front of Sokolov's office, and once his gaze registered the unwelcomed guests, he opened fire with a machine gun, taking quite a few with him, in fact, yet in the end, tragically succumbing to the Lady Death herself. The tumult would not end there, however, as a thunderous sound was suddenly produced, a product of the militants violently entering Sokolov's office. Shortly after this truly inconsiderate entrance, a conversation initiated between some who now found themselves present inside the office. "Well, look at that, boys." The leader of the group had begun talking as he removed his headgear after witnessing the absence of a weapon on Sokolov's possession. "The infamous Dr. Sokolov, and he is not even armed. I thought you were supposed to be smart." The leader's ridicule was appreciated by his subordinates, as slight laughter was heard inside the office briefly after the comment was made. "Yes, that's very amusing," Sokolov stated dismissively, "but I am afraid you would not know smart if it was your mother." More laughing was heard after the doctor's remark, however. This occurrence was quickly and abruptly halted as the leader began looking around the room to spot those responsible for such hysterics. "Yeah, all right." The leader had once again returned his vision towards the doctor as he was unsuccessful in locating the aforementioned offenders. "So, you going to come peacefully, or do we need to negotiate here, huh?" The leader was full of himself truly as he vocalized his sentiment, even chuckling to himself shortly after. Sokolov was not impressed. Negotiate? Wow, that's quite a big word for someone like you. Those tutoring lessons at your academy must have paid off, though I do wonder, would you be able to spell it?" Sokolov was unrelenting. The man had not a gun on him, yet he fired the bullets of mockery. Valeria was pleased by her husband's line of attack as she grinned in agreement. "Oh, I am about to give you something to spell, all right." The leader was done being bullied by the doctor and had begun to pull out his pistol. Sokolov was not shaken by this even remotely. "You know, friend." The doctor had suddenly swapped the ammunition of ridicule for the rounds of sarcasm while referring to the leader as friend. "If you kill me, then you won't know about the surprise." The doctor finished with a sinister smile, placarding the enclave of his face. "You know what the word surprise means now, don't you?" The doctor would not be stopped as he continued his merciless barrage. The leader was vexed. That part was most certainly true, but he did decide to humour the doctor and to play along. "Do you think it's intelligent to provoke a man with a gun, doctor?" the leader stated, having now lined the pistol up, aiming directly at Alexander Sokolov, who once again remained unfazed. "Yes, speaking on the topic of intelligence." The scientist's words carried his typical instructive tone, yet ridicule had not yet made her departure. "There are different classifications of intelligence. That's types, by the way, as I am assuming you didn't know," Sokolov stated with a smile by the name of deep derision. The leader was quickly beginning to become uncontrollably frustrated as he scrapped his finger against the trigger of the pistol while grinding his teeth. There is arithmetic intelligence, there is creative intelligence, and of course there is perceptive intelligence, the ability to observe, so to speak. The doctor continued with his lesson. "And I am afraid it is exactly this criterion that you find yourself lacking in the most, my friend. As you see, you have not observed, upon making your grandiose entry, of course, those surprises I have mentioned before." The leader's vehicle of anger had suddenly hit a wall of doubt. "What the hell are you talking about, Sokolov?" The leader spoke aggressively, demanding clarification from the good doctor. "Yes, well, perhaps it would be better if I show you. Infantile minds react better to visual stimulus, after all." The doctor finished as he fired off one last bullet of mockery at the militant in front of him, shortly after depressing a button of a detonator. Incidentally, the leader had failed to spot this device occupying Sokolov's right hand whilst the two were talking. Perception certainly was not the man's strong suit. The storms of the planet Jupiter had been given a run for their money, as the blare produced by the explosions were ear-splitting, to say the least. To guarantee the spread of just those explosions, the corridors and rooms of the facility had been filled with gas, odourless yet extremely flammable. Torrents of all-embracing fire had begun devouring the facility whole, whilst the detonations continued providing the backing vocals, if you will. As well as the men had been trained, unsettling panic did in fact perforate its way through and into the soldiers' hearts. "What the fuck? Run, run, run!" shouted one of the mercenaries as he began to dash out of the room. All had obeyed this suggestion, however. The leader himself chose to remain lodged inside the luxurious office for just a brief moment longer to perform an act he desired most. "Goodbye, Doctor," the leader said as he squeezed the trigger of the pistol. The gunshot resonance was greatly muffled by the overwhelming dissonance produced by the explosions. However, the effect was anything but. Suddenly, Alexander Sokolov dropped with 3 gunshot wounds to the abdomen. "Alexander!" Valeria rushed to her husband at once at the speed of a racing car. "Stay with me, Alexander!" Valeria exclaimed while attempting to apply pressure on the multiple wounds. Sokolov's facial acreage was tilled with the great tool of relief as a genuine beam of happiness began to slowly form across. Martines continued her attempts of saving her beloved husband while she shouted, residing under the umbrella of misery, however, the woman's voice was dampened quite so to the doctor, with his vision blurred more and more as each passing second elapsed. With now a fully formed smile, Sokolov uttered his final words. "I love you," Dr. Sokolov stated, with not just one woman present in the room, but two even. The cold mistress, that was Lady Death, had made her appearance at once to collect what was rightfully hers. Valeria Martines cried her heart out with her head on her dead husband's chest, but soon enough Death would claim yet another soul once the fires and the blasts had barged their way into the office, much like the mercenary team before, and had consumed the two lovers whole. A grim reminder of one's own mortality, this was as not a single individual escaped the embrace of the cataclysmic flames on this day of summer in the year of 2010. "What's the matter with him?" stated Extant, while pacing around in a lightly forested area in a relatively near vicinity of the compound from which Gray and the 4 children had just recently departed. "His mother and father just died. X died." X explained to her older brother the plight of her younger one, who had broken down entirely upon hearing the loud, distant blasts, having full comprehension of just what those sounds entailed. VI, of course, deeply loved Sokolov and Martines. They were XXV's mother and father too, but he is fine. Xeon found himself unable to discover the sense needed to truly understand the gravitas and calamity of the current predicament. That they had all found themselves swaddled in, that's because XXV is basically a robot. X burst out in an illustrative fashion. "I am sorry, XXV. I didn't mean any offence by that." X quickly became trapped in the box of guilt, as she deeply respected her oldest brother. "No offence taken, sister." Without a single waver, XXV had said, "They were your parents too, you know." X expressed herself at XTI admonishingly while physically comforting her other crushed brother, the giant with the heart of gold. "Yeah, all right. I saw Sokolov maybe an entire 3 times while in the facility, and as far as my so-called mother is concerned." Psith took a respite to light a cigarette. "The woman stayed 100 meters away from me at all times and called me the devil." XVI eyes required another moment to himself in order to take a drag of the prior mentioned. "So, crucify me for not missing the bitch." The artifinoid finished his sentiment, while on his way of finishing the freshly started fag. "Why don't you show that woman some respect, you impudent twat?" The fiery tone that Gray had produced matched the intensity of the fire raging at the facility nearby. Yeah, keep your pants on over there, Don Quixote." Exercise responded to his father in a sneering manner, while his unreserved attention remained on the burning stick. "That's not quite how that idiom is used, XVII. XXV had entered the conversation to play the role of the much-needed moderator. "At any rate, our current discourse is hardly one considered productive." "Dr. Gray," XXV stated while shifting his vision onto the riled-up doctor. "How soon until we are able to depart for England?" XXV concluded while the sobs of his youngest brother began to slowly attenuate. "There will be a car scheduled to pick us up tomorrow at the local train station in the evening." Gray responded, having required a moment to compose himself. "Yes, we will remain inside the local town up until then, despite the fact that our existence is unknown to the government as well as the public. We must show great caution when and if we were to interact with the locals." XXV had shifted his vision yet again, this time pointing his didactic gaze onto Xtheanth. XVI, I had swiftly picked up on the visual insinuation. Yeah, I won't do anything to your precious locals." There took a respite, albeit not because of the cigarette. Well, I won't do anything I already haven't done to the locals. Eyes spoke, referencing a certain ethically questionable act he had performed on certain locals in the past. That will have to suffice,
XXV stated instantly, having been fully anticipant of his younger brother's remark.
We should start moving now, as we have truly a long road ahead of us. No disagreements were observed once XXV had finished his sentiment, as the four, alongside Grey, began to do as recently discussed. The long distance that the oldest creation had mentioned was quite true, as their ultimate destination was the United States of America. However, in the distance much closer than that of across the pond was, of course, the blazing facility, albeit that wasn't the part deserving the title of noteworthy, as deep inside the basement of the building consumed by flames was left undamaged a hard drive, and on that glorious piece of technology there were